Hello, everyone. Welcome to Friday's edition of Weekend Waypoints, a production of SEC Extra and D1Baseball.com. We've officially made it. SEC play is here after a non-conference slate that felt like it dragged on for a long time. I don't know about you guys, but I was kind of tired of the non-conference slate. Ready to move on to best on best in the SEC. Certainly looking forward to it. Before we get into any of that, I have to remind you that this episode of Weekend Waypoints and every episode of Weekend Waypoints this season is brought to you by Academy Sports and Outdoors. Get ready for a new season of fishing fun with Academy Sports and Outdoors and reel in the best gear at low prices every day. Plus, Academy offers easy ways to shop and save time, like free 1-hour in-store or curbside pickup on academy.com orders. All right, before we begin with anything more specific here, let me share my screen because we have a thing of beauty right here, folks. This is a very clean, neat scoreboard with 8 series, not 16, or, sometimes if teams are playing double headers, it had 18 games on it at one time, or, darn near close to 20 games on it for the SEC sometimes. And this, fits on, I don't have to scroll. It just fits on one image there. You got to love it. So that's today's schedule. It should be a heck of a lot of fun. Flip over. We got some comments. Good SEC opening weekend morning to you, Mr. Joe. Thank you, vis-a-vis. James Gillum. What's up, Joe? Hi, James. How are you? Good to hear from you again. Let's get into some of the specifics here. First of all, note, and if you're an Arkansas or Ole Miss supporter, you probably already know this, but that game moved up 3 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. local to try to get out in front of some weather. There's also, I know here in the Carolinas, we've got some weather on Sunday that might be a little bit dicey. I don't know if that's going to affect anybody except maybe South Carolina, Oklahoma, but we do have some weather just kind of lurking, if you will, and that's springtime in the Southeast. I don't have to tell you guys. So that is just kind of the reality of the situation. Carl mentions LSU game moved this afternoon. That is also true. I need to pass along a note to the folks who manage our scoreboard. Thank you, Carl. I will do that. Just so we have that reflected. But yes, LSU also moved up its game against Missouri. James says I would expect SC to play doubleheader tomorrow. I also expect that. I just don't see a window on Sunday. Nicholas Doherty says, "Morning, Joe. Is this a make or break weekend for A&M?" Make or break's a little extreme, just because. Look, I mean, 4:30 local. Thank you, Carl. 5:30 Eastern, 4:30 local for LSU Mizzou. For A&M, it's too early for make or break for me, just because. Look, I mean, LSU last year was 3-12 in SEC play. Now, obviously, A&M has greater aspirations than being a 2 seed in a regional and getting to a regional final. So I get that. I'm not saying that's what they're shooting for, but it just goes to show that, the SEC campaign is long. It's 30 games. That being said, I do think A&M will snap out of some of this, because I do think there are some things that are, I don't want to say flukes because the team isn't playing well. I'm not here to try to convince you they are, but there are some things that are fluky about the way that things have started for them. And then some things I'm more concerned about. And Griffin, I see your question there about the difference maker in A&M and Bama this weekend. I'll talk about that when we get to that series, because I'm going to quickly, we won't do this every Friday, but just going to run down each series quickly here. A couple of bullet points on each, just to kind of set the table, since it is opening day after all. So we'll do that. When we get to A&M and Bama in short order here, we'll talk a little bit more about that. But I want to start with Tennessee and Florida in Knoxville. That's the headliner for me. I wrote about it. Go check out my SEC Series of the Week post, which always goes up Thursday night into Friday morning. I just can't imagine something. We could have asked for much more for an SEC opening series to have these two facing each other. Lindsey Nelson's going to be rocking. It's going to be loud. The fire marshal is probably going to have to give them an official number to cap it at, because whatever number they allow, it's probably not enough. And also, I think crucially, it might be the best pitching matchup of the entire season. Now, there might be others. Obviously, there are other great pitchers in the SEC. But it's hard to beat Liam Doyle and Liam Peterson with the way those two guys have been throwing this year. And if Liam Doyle dominates this game, he's not going to dominate them the way he dominated, I don't know, Hofstra, because Hofstra and Florida, very different teams. I don't have to tell you that. But if he dominates this, I do think we have to start to look at this season maybe as, oh, we might have something really special on our hands here. We'll see. I don't want to overhype anything necessarily before he's thrown a pitch this season in SEC play. But man, 61 outs recorded, 47 via strikeout is just crazy stuff. And the fastball's elite of the elite. But Liam Peterson's been really good too. And so, if you told me this is just a really good pitcher's duel where it comes down to one, at least on Friday, where it comes down to one play and that could go either way, like, I'd believe it just because both guys are that good. I'd also believe it if you told me that both guys strike out a bunch of guys, but they also gave up some home runs, because both of these teams are very physical. I think home runs will be hit even against top pitchers. So, especially ones that throw as many fastballs as Doyle and Peterson. So I do think there are a lot of outcomes possible for Friday's game. Saturday's matchup, Aiden King versus Marcus Phillips. That's interesting as well. TBA's on Sunday for those two games. I'm interested in the Tennessee freshman against Liam Peterson and Florida's other big-time arms. Obviously, based on what they've shown us, I don't have any doubts they'll succeed in that regard. But hey, it's their first time going against somebody the quality of Florida's arms, at least for 3 consecutive days. So I'm kind of interested to see how Levi Clark and Manny Marin and Jay Abernathy deal with those types of guys. Levi Clark in particular, because he's just been, almost unfathomably hot to start this season. Okay, let's talk about Arkansas and Ole Miss. Hunter Elliott versus an SEC lineup is interesting to me. I have to admit he's been better than I thought he would. I thought there'd be a little rust from a starting standpoint, through some last year, obviously. So not just arm rust, but just kind of like rust in terms of being ready to start every single weekend and give Ole Miss depth. But he's been better than I anticipated. The stuff is good. The stuff is maybe even a little bit better in some regards than when we last saw him in 2022, as a starter anyway. And I'm just fascinated to see what he does against an Arkansas lineup that has swung the bat pretty well. I think there's a chance that Arkansas has some stars in this lineup that we haven't seen them have in a while. The Aloy brothers, obviously. Brent Iredale swung the bat well. I won't just start naming guys because I'll inevitably leave someone off. But even if they don't, the depth is really impressive in that lineup right now. And not just with guys who can run the ball at the ballpark. Oh, that's also true. But, they have a pretty diverse lineup in terms of guys who can play the inside game, guys who can run, guys who can hit the ball at the ballpark, guys who work long at bats. Like, it's just a lot of different looks in that Arkansas lineup. A note here, Zach Root moved to Friday for Arkansas. Gabe Gackle has just not quite, he had the one really bad start, but even in the ones that weren't that, he just hasn't quite been what we expected yet. We'll see if that's still in there. I'd like to think that's still in there, him being the guy we expected him to be, but so far it has not been quite as smooth as you like. And so I'm interested to see what he does on Saturday, but Zach Root moved up to Friday. He's been every bit as good as expected for the Razorbacks. And then the other thing for Ole Miss that's interesting is, what do Riley Maddox and Mason Nichols do on Saturday and Sunday in games 2 and 3 behind Hunter Elliott? Because I do think there's a difference there with how they perform, not just this weekend, but moving forward. Could be the difference in Ole Miss being a team that, hey, we're back in the mix to host and maybe be a top 8 or whatever, or them being a team that wins a bunch of Friday games because Hunter Elliott's that good, and then has a bunch of toss-up games on Saturday and Sunday. And that's just kind of a stressful way to live, and it does create like a situation where, 1 or 2 games could go either way, and that's the difference between, hosting and frankly being on the bubble. So that's going to be a storyline all season long, not just this weekend. Flipping over to comments here. Good timing that I looked at this comment. Outside of the Aloy brothers, I've been really impressed with Brent Iredale. He looks like a dude and has played pretty well. I think he has what it takes to hit SEC pitchers. I agree. Scouts agree. Typically sometimes you can have a guy who's swinging it well, and then you talk to scouts and they're like, yeah, he's having success, but here's why I'm concerned about him every single day against guys who are just throwing, seeds at 95 miles an hour and better. But I don't hear that with Brent Iredale. I'm with you. I think he's ready to hit SEC pitching. I think it's gonna be a lot of fun to watch. He's another guy that could be that centerpiece of the lineup that Arkansas has been looking for. They might have multiple guys better than what they've had in previous years. Patrick Langley says scouts are wrong too a lot. Yeah, agreed. Like nobody's gonna be perfect on that. But if I'm trying to project who can hit SEC pitching after non-conference, I'm going to be more likely to feel confident about someone that scouts think, hey, he's got the bat speed, he's got the athleticism, he's got the bat to ball skill to do that versus ones they have concerns about. So it's not 100%. I would never try to suggest it is, but I would always prefer to have the guy that evaluators feel good about from that standpoint. All right, Alabama A&M. Maybe it's like cliche or too easy an answer, but like if Justin LeBron just like takes over the weekend, it wouldn't surprise me. And then B, I'm not sure, I'm just not sure A&M will, if he's his best version. I don't know that anybody has much of anything for Justin LeBron this year with the way he's swinging the bat. He's such a good athlete defensively. He's so fun to watch. He's obviously swinging with a lot of confidence right now. A guy his size is, at least as of last I checked, leading the nation in home runs, leading in RBIs. He doesn't look like that type of player, but man, when I saw him in Jacksonville, it wasn't just like home runs to his pole side that kind of tucked in around the foul pole. It was opposite field gap, 400 and some odd feet. It was pretty impressive stuff. So he's obviously a key player there. For A&M, I think Justin Lampkin, this is a good Alabama lineup. But I feel great about Ryan Prager, obviously, as I will pretty much every weekend. But does A&M get a quality start, Saturday and or Sunday? And Justin Lampkin, with his experience and his ability, seems like the type of guy that could go either way. Like he could have a great start, or, Alabama could get to him because it's a really talented lineup, even beyond Justin LeBron. So I think that's going to be important. I'm not really worried about A&M offensively necessarily, especially with Jay Laviolette. I've seen the batted ball data. He's still hitting the ball hard for the most part. Hits just maybe aren't falling as much as he would like and as A&M would like. I just don't have a lot of concern there. Well, maybe I'm wrong, but that's where I'm at now. What worries me a little bit more is the defense. The defense has not been good. And I know they have some guys they've moved around. They've got some guys playing out of position to fill in gaps. Obviously, the Grahovec injury kind of set off like a domino effect of guys having to play in different spots and all that. So I get why it might be happening, but the defense hasn't been good enough, frankly. And the thing that worries me about that is twofold. One is that an error at a critical time is just such a backbreaker in SEC play, because games are generally just so tight and so competitive. And so one play, one way or the other, just tends to make a pretty big difference. And so, if you get a botched infield throw with the bases loaded and it lets in 2 runs, like that's just a backbreaker. So I think there's that. And my other concern is that, hitting slumps, pitchers go through funks, but defense doesn't tend to slump. And so I'm not saying A&M can't get better. In fact, I would bet on them being better and not fielding 963 or whatever the number is right now. I do think that'll come up. But I do worry they just kind of are what they are defensively, and that they're not going to come up to being 976 or what have you. So I do worry about the fact that, the defensively, Tigers really don't change their stripes. And I don't mean Tigers like LSU or Missouri, but or Auburn. But I just mean like you just kind of are what you are defensively sometimes. And I worry for A&M's sake that's what this is going to be. So it should be a lot of fun in College Station. Kendall Rogers will be there for at least part of that series. I'm not sure exactly how many games, but follow along with his coverage. Griffin Smith says, maybe want to change your pick from A&M to Bama. Yeah, I did pick A&M. I just have a hard time quitting A&M because they're so talented, right? And I was so convicted of them as the number 1 team in the country going into the year. But I mean, I think you could make an argument either way, and it would be interesting if I were wrong, just because I do think, it really, if A&M does lose this series, while I'm not ready to say this is make or break, I am willing to say that if A&M gets beat on its home field in this series, it is going to set off another round of like soul searching and trying to figure out what's wrong with A&M. And I don't know what other buttons Michael Early would have to push at this point, but we would see. So Lindsey Crosby, my good friend on the Auburn beat, I made a pick of Kentucky knocking off Georgia this weekend and don't feel great about it. Yeah, we'll get to that series in just a minute. And I don't think I would feel great about that series no matter who I'd picked, because that's a series I don't have a great feel for, and I'll talk about why here shortly. Next on my list, though, is Vanderbilt and Auburn. Speaking of the Auburn beat. First off, you've probably seen the news. I believe, speaking of Lindsey Crosby, he might have been the first person to break this news, and my apologies if that wasn't the case, but I saw it first from him. No Ike Irish this weekend. Supposedly not going to have any baseball activity for about 10 days. And that's not, hey, he's ready in 10 days. That's, hey, he can get back to doing all the normal baseball things in 10 days, which doesn't guarantee that he'll be back, within a couple of days of that. So we're probably looking at least a couple weeks here. The good news, not the good news, because you don't want that to happen, but the silver lining here is that he hasn't really been swinging it great anyway. It's not been bad. He's hitting, I don't know, like just under 280, but not a lot of power. And the Auburn lineup has been fine. The Auburn lineup has performed pretty well largely without him, at least without the Ike Irish that we know, right? So I think that's the silver lining there. Is Auburn should feel pretty good about what it has offensively, even without Ike Irish, even though you would obviously much prefer to have him. So that's interesting to me. And consider me intrigued by the Vanderbilt rotation. J.D. Thompson has looked really good. Cody Bowker was a guy I was just kind of wrong about, at least based on what I've seen so far. Understanding that SEC plays a different animal, but I thought Cody Bowker was a guy who's like a high floor guy. He put up pretty good numbers at Georgetown, but it's Georgetown. And, when you look at the radar gun readings and the whiff rate numbers, nothing really necessarily stood out about him when he committed to Vanderbilt in the portal. And so I thought, okay, maybe midweek guy, Sunday guy, that type of thing, but he's really taken the bull by the horns in the rotation. And so I'm intrigued by what he does against SEC competition, which this weekend against Auburn will be a good test for that on the road. Last weekend, they used Ethan McIlvain in a piggyback situation. Look, with a talent as big as Ethan McIlvain, that's not really what you're hoping for ultimately is, hey, it's a Sunday guy and a piggyback. That's not necessarily the way you draw it up, but he was not particularly good the first 3 weeks. And so if that's what it takes to kind of set him on a more positive course is, hey, go out there and get us 9-10 outs and then we'll call it good. Like if that's what it is, then that's what it is. And it's certainly better than what he was doing before. So should be a lot of fun this weekend. I'm sure Plainsman Park is going to be, as long as the weather cooperates there, should be a lot of fun in that ballpark, newly renovated ballpark for that weekend. Texas at Mississippi State. Welcome to the SEC, Texas. Here you go in the biggest venue, most opulent venue in the SEC. Honestly, like if you're a Texas fan, I actually kind of love it for you if you're able to travel to this, because you are going to get the Duty Noble experience right out of the gate, which I think is cool if you're just a visiting fan, and those folks will treat you well. They'll feed you. But yeah, if you show up as a road opponent and you're just, looking to have a good time and you're, looking to be friendly and cordial with everybody, like you'll have a great time there, because those folks will treat you well. And it should be a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to seeing Pico Khan against the Texas lineup. It's a veteran Texas lineup, and we can poke some holes in Texas's lineup right now. It's not necessarily stellar from top to bottom, but I like what they're doing at the top. Ethan Mendoza just looks like a much better player than he was at Arizona State last year when he was already pretty good. Max Ballew's off to a good start. Adrian Rodriguez, the freshman, has really taken to college baseball very quickly. So that's going to be a fun matchup there. Jared Spencer being on the mound in that environment on Friday night is interesting to me. I think it helps in his case that he has pitched in a super regional. He's pitched in regionals a couple times. So while he did not see environments like the one he's going to see Friday, it's not like he's never seen it, right? So like during the regular season at Indiana State, he's not really seeing those environments, but he has been in a postseason where he has pitched in those. So I think that helps, but that will be something to watch, is a Texas pitching staff that doesn't have a ton of, at least among the new guys, doesn't have a ton of guys who have pitched in that type of situation. How do they end up handling that moment? Flipping over to comments here. Big Mel with a LSU, and then some brooms. Yeah, if LSU plays as well as it can and has, then yeah, that'll be a sweep. It obviously it's at home. And that helps a lot. Okay, Oklahoma and South Carolina. Mark Etheridge will be there. And if you're not aware, my colleague at SEC Extra, Mark Etheridge, is doing 10 games in 10 venues in 10 days, beginning tonight in Starkville, actually. So his coverage will be from there tonight. But then he's some of the games are non-SEC, like in the midweek, right? Because, there's only so many games happening and it has to fit in his drive path. But it's a lot of SEC games, including 3 this weekend. But he'll see at least he's slated to see Oklahoma and South Carolina. 2 questions for South Carolina in this series, because even though they are the home team, it kind of feels like Oklahoma is favored here. Like South Carolina just hasn't, there was the sweep at Clemson, and it's had a lot of games against lesser competition where it's not really taking care of business as seamlessly as you would like to see. But 2 keys here. Can South Carolina hit enough? And then can South Carolina slow down, not stop, but slow down the Oklahoma running game? I say slow down because you're not going to totally stop it. Like even good teams with really good defensive catchers and pitchers that are really good at holding runners aren't going to stop the Oklahoma running game, but can they at least slow it down and throw some guys out? That's been a real problem for South Carolina. Catcher is a problem. If you haven't listened to it, go back and listen to my most recent episode of Highway to Hoover. I had South Carolina beat writer Alan Cole on the show, and we talked about the catcher position at length and kind of set the table for what's at play here, where Talmadge Lecroy was the starter there, veteran in the program, but he got injured early in the season, is now just kind of playing through it because South Carolina doesn't have any better options, really. They've lost one of their catchers to injuries. Another one of their catchers, Max Coffer, got a shot and it didn't go well. So there's a little bit skittish about that. And then you've got Ryan Bakes, who hasn't played a ton. So they're just kind of caught out right now from a catching standpoint. And I think Oklahoma can exploit that. Oklahoma, I think, with Kyson Witherspoon on the mound and with South Carolina's offensive struggles, I think is a good matchup for Oklahoma. So if South Carolina is going to win the series, it kind of needs to be prepared for the idea that, hey, we're just going to have to win Saturday and Sunday and, try to win some ugly games because against Kyson Witherspoon, at least if he pitches like he has, that's going to be a really, really tough matchup. I do like South Carolina's pitching. I think they've performed well. It will behoove South Carolina to keep the scores low this weekend because it's just not built to win slugfest, right? At least not right now. Flipping back over to the comments here. First off, on this series, Stone getting the ball tonight. So that's interesting. Thank you, James, for that reminder there. I have a better chance of throwing guys out than any of the Carolina catchers. Yeah, maybe me too, James. I have bad knees, and I feel like I could maybe have some success there. But yeah, Brandon Stone getting the start. We also talked about that with Alan Cole on the podcast, that Brandon Stone's probably their best guy so far this season. I think Jake McCoy maybe has the highest ceiling of any of the starters they've had out there, but Stone's been a reliever, but he's been really good, and he's second on the team in innings pitched. So it's not like you have a concern about workload with him jumping into the rotation. So that's interesting. With Kyson on the mound for Oklahoma, I still think it's going to be a real tough row to hoe for South Carolina tonight. But having Brandon Stone on the mound does make me feel good about their chances to at least be in the fight, if you will. Will Avent says, good morning, Joe. Good morning, Will. What are your thoughts on UGA pitching this year? Do you think it was more Coach Johnson trying out a lot of pitchers and they'll be trimming down who he uses for SEC play? So on the last part of that, yes, I do think that is the case. And you see a lot of that in SEC play. I look at Alabama's pitchers and they've used like 21 guys, which is similar to what Georgia's used. Like, not obviously, even if you take off the guys who are out now with injuries or guys who are only pitching in mop-up duty, you've still got, even if you take out those guys, what you're left with is still more guys than you're going to end up using in SEC play. So yes is the short answer there. The thing about Georgia's pitching that's been weird to me is that the guys, and here in the background, I'll pull up the stat sheet so that I don't botch this as I talk about it. But the interesting thing about them is that the guys that you felt pretty confident in, like we know what we're going to get from this guy for Georgia, haven't really pitched like you expected. And the guys that were kind of like more of a shoulder shrug have actually pitched pretty well. And maybe there's something to do with usage that has helped that. But, well, heck, I'll just show you this screen because it's easier than me reading numbers off to you. So hang on tight for just a second. Sharing again. There are too many windows open in the background. That makes it kind of tough. Okay. So, yeah, I mean, Alton Davis was a guy that, I mean, he's pitched 5 times. He's thrown almost 10 innings. So they're still trying to use him, but 12.10 ERA. Opponents are hitting almost 400 against him. Brian Zeldin was so good last year, 8.49 ERA. They were super hyped about Zach Brown as a transfer from Ohio State, and he was good at Ohio State last year, 7.84 ERA. Colton Smith, in fairness to him, dealing with a little bit of a tweaked back going into opening weekend, so still kind of working his way back to feeling himself. 7 ERA. Leighton Finley, 6 ERA. Zach Harris is 5.63. I think is actually better than what it was last year, but I think they were hoping for a little bit more of a jump from him. But then you flip up here to the top of it, and outside of Brian Curley, who I think people thought would be a dude even before we knew he was going to throw 100 miles an hour. So that one feels right. But then you've got DJ Radke, who has just been a kind of like a mop-up reliever in the past. He's thrown the ball well. Jordan Stevens, who came in with, a ton of command issues, has thrown the ball well. Tyler McLaughlin, Eric Hammond, who sometimes struggled to get on the mound at USC. JT Quinn, who really struggled as a weekend guy at Ole Miss the last couple of years. Paul Farley, who I will put my hand up and say I did not know who that was coming into the season. Justin Bird, a transfer from USC Aiken. So again, like maybe usage has something to do with some of this and why the stats are maybe upside down. Because the guys we expected to pitch to be their important guys have pitched in more leverage situations or against better opponents. I do think that probably has something to do with it, but not all of it. So that's what's interesting to me about Georgia. And it's as much, I saw them opening weekend, it's as much pitching talent as I've seen from top to bottom this year. I think, Tennessee's in that mix, LSU's in that mix, but Georgia's certainly in that conversation. Yet it just hasn't totally come together to be what we thought it would be. Let me make sure I got all the comments there before Caleb Falk says, as an LSU fan, I get the hype on Tennessee. They are talented. Only good teams they have beat is Arizona and Oklahoma State. LSU has beat DBU, Nebraska, and Kansas State, all teams who could be in regionals. Yeah. And ultimately, like that, the non-conference slate, we can compare a little bit, but ultimately I just think, Caleb, like I do agree with your general premise of like LSU does have some decent wins there. I think you could kind of counteract it and say like Arizona might be the best. Might be the best of those wins, and that's one Tennessee has. But regardless, I just think we kind of need to wait and let this figure itself out. All right, let's move on to Kentucky and Georgia. Speaking of Georgia, so I just touched on Georgia's pitchers there. I think this is a chance for Kentucky to make a statement, and it's kind of interesting that Kentucky's unranked. We did talk about them in our last top 25 ranking, but ultimately we didn't have enough teams coming out to move them in. So they're unranked. Georgia's ranked number 4, but I think those two teams are a lot closer than that ranking discrepancy would lead you to believe. I really like the way Kentucky's played this season. I think last weekend's series win against Wofford was, for those who know college baseball, I think are impressed with that. So that's all good. Nick McKay and Ben Cleaver, 1-2 in the rotation. I'm excited to see those guys against a good Georgia lineup in a ballpark that, as we know, can sometimes play a little small. So that'll be something to watch for there. And then Georgia in general, set aside the pitching part of it, I just think in general, like they keep winning games, but man, they've had to work pretty hard for a lot of them. And I don't know what to make of that. I really don't. So I'm just going to leave that there because I'm not necessarily saying, I truly don't know what to make of it. But it does feel like they've had to work pretty doggone hard for some wins that I thought were not going to be necessarily hard work. Last series is LSU and Missouri, but let's make sure. Sven Kreuzberg says Georgia and the Little League Park. Yeah, I mean, it does play offensive, but there are a number of places in the SEC that play pretty offensive, so they are not alone in having a park that plays offense. Landon Lewis says, hit the like. Thank you, Landon. And yeah, if you're whatever your platform you're watching on, hit the likes or the hearts or whatever else it is. I appreciate you guys. Missouri and LSU, and all I really got on this one is if LSU plays as it has, it's a sweep. I don't mean to be, I don't mean to beat a dead horse with Missouri, but it's just been a struggle for them. I do think their offense is a little better than it was last year, which I know is kind of damning with faint praise because the offense was really bad last year at Mizzou. Do think it's a little better. One of my favorite guys from Mizzou is Caden Nicoletto. He's an Australian. who was at a D2 last year, a D2 college located like a mile away from Mizzou's campus. So he didn't even have to move apartments unless he wants to. But he's not that athletic. He's not that big. He's not the flashiest guy, but the dude just hits. He's hitting 422 right now. It's just kind of a fun thing because that's the type of player that can thrive in college baseball that just, you just don't see in pro ball. So again, if LSU plays its game, it will get out of the box with a sweep. And that's a good start for SEC play when you consider where they started last year. Last year, they had this gauntlet, the first 15 games. This year, the gauntlet will start, believe me. But having Mizzou out of the gate is obviously a good deal there. Don't mean to short LSU just because it's Mizzou, and so we haven't talked about them a ton, but love the young players, Derek Curiel in the lineup, William Schmidt, Kason Evans on the mound. I saw a quote from Jay Johnson, I believe yesterday, day before, that he says William Schmidt has probably now done pitching in midweek games for the rest of his LSU career, just because he's saying he's ready for a prominent role on the weekend, and that'll be and that'll be cool to see. Always love to see that the young guys get out there and get a shot in big time college baseball right away, and LSU obviously has guys who are ready for it. So that should be a lot of fun all season. All right. Good show. Good questions for a Friday. And everybody's, I think, is hyped for SEC play. So we had a lot of interest this week. So love to see that. Thank you for carving out a little time on a Friday morning to join me here today. Again, follow my colleague Mark Etheridge because he's on this big 10-day trip starting this weekend. He'll be in Starkville tonight. Kendall Rogers will be at A&M. So make sure you're following their coverage. I'm going to be, since Mark is out, I'm home trying to watch as many games at one time as I can. We will see. We'll see how well I do that because, it's tough to keep up with everything, but I will do my very best. So we'll be back here tomorrow morning, recapping the first day of SEC play, getting you ready for Saturday's games. But until then, I will talk to you soon.